We're going to try to make this short, no speeches, more of a rapid kind of discussion, questions that if we can get through a lot of questions, we can cover a lot of ground. And, you know, if there's time at the end, we'll have some questions. But we've got three great speakers here from three very different points of view. Obviously, energy is a big issue in Texas, as you all know. It powers our business. It powers every single part of our daily life, whether that be oil and gas or electricity and other forms of energy. That's what we produce our products from. So the importance cannot be understated. In the face of Winter Storm Uri, the electricity side clearly has been one that costs lives, which we can't afford to allow to happen again. We're in the midst of this thing called an energy transition. I wish I knew who coined that phrase, but it's probably the same person that coined the phrase smart grid about 10 years ago, because everybody's got their own definition of what it is. So we are going to first go down the line here and ask our panelists, so what does the transition in energy mean to each of your companies? And the federal government there at the end, which, sure. Hesston, why don't we go down the line here?
Sure. You know, I think for us at AES, it's not so much a transition, right? It truly is an energy expansion. Because as we look at ourselves in the mirror as a company, you know, in certain parts of the country, we are a utility in some regulated markets where, you know, we have to keep the lights on. And so transitioning strictly to green energy right now isn't really in the cards, right? But it is about building on and adding that to the portfolio. So in places like Indiana, you know, we are converting coal to gas because it's much cleaner, but then we're also tacking on 4.5–5 gigawatts of clean energy and battery storage to supplement that. You know, here in Texas, it's, you know, a very similar situation where it's about, you know, Texas remaining strong in the energy sector and expanding and truly being the global center of energy and maintaining that title. So, you know, for us, it's really about expanding and growing just an overall energy portfolio across the grid.
Bryan, as the largest natural gas-fired generator in the state, one of the largest in the U.S., how do you all view this transition?
For us, transition is just about meeting our customer expectations, and I don't have to tell TAB this, but you know, there's no business that doesn't eventually have customer-facing demand, and so for us, you know, Calpine, 12 big gas-fired power plants in Texas, but you know, we serve municipalities, we serve co-ops, we serve industrial customers, and of course we serve residential consumers through our retail brands. And so the transition is just trying to figure out what our customers want and meet their needs. So for example, and this is something I'll talk about later in this panel, but we've got a bunch of industrial customers that have their own environmental goals and they want to have reliable, affordable power. And so gas power plants are something that's got an on switch, it's dispatchable. And so we're trying to figure out how we can help our consumer clients meet their goals, and one of the ways that we're trying to do that is through carbon capture and sequestration. So for us, the transition is really just how can we help our customers achieve the things that they want to do.
Suresh, you come from a great background. You're the banker of us, and a Texas banker who works for the Department of Energy, the loan program. What's success in this transition? How does your office, the loan program office, get us there and move us towards the transition that you defined?
Yeah, I think, you know, for us, success is, you know, clearly related to part achieving our climate goals. I think that's important to us. Part is creating a manufacturing base in the U.S. that promotes jobs, that also allows us to diversify our energy resources. I just looked something up before I came in. We're at peak oil production in the U.S. We're at peak gas production in the U.S. We are going to have significant amount of energy demand going forward as we grow our economies with businesses, and which means that if we want to meet our climate goals, in addition to having our local resources, we have to create new sectors, which is what we're doing. And the goal is to get the cost curve down so it can be economic for everybody and we can create GDP growth. That's what it means for the Loan Program Office.
Great, great. What does encompass a transition fuel or a transition, fuel in the loan program's view?
We really want to champion all of the above. It's super important for us as a country's objective. But when we put the overlay of making sure that we're delivering clean energy, I think we're really focused on a handful of things, which is how do we take carbon out of carbon fuels? I think that's very important. So it's really clean fuels as we think about sustainable aviation fuels or biofuels or biodiesels, et cetera. Or it's carbon sequestration. You can still burn natural gas or oil or what have you. The question is, can you do that in a cleaner way and economically? So that's important to us. Geothermal, Texas has one of the largest resource bases of geothermal. So does other parts of our country. We also have nuclear, which is very important to us. We do think that's clean, and we've seen some new reactors go up. We think we'd like to get the country to have more. Like I said, we're going to need so much energy as we think about computing, which is extremely important. It's going to impact all of our business lives. That takes energy. And then we're also looking at, how do we get more electricity on the grid, whether it's through transmission, and how do we get electricity? I think it's through a lot of new renewable generation, distributed generation. Storage is an absolute important component of this. So it all feeds into our clean energy objectives and doing it in a way that we can save consumers costs as we go through this transition.
Hesston, would you like to go?
No, I was just going to add, I think the comment was made about what customers are looking for, and I think that's one of the key pieces to this transition is, we at AES, we've, over the last 5 to 6 years, been the largest producer of clean energy to corporate clients. And actually in the last few years have outpaced structured deals with corporate clients than traditional PPAs. And it's really, the market is driving a lot of this as well. And so I think, to the point of what do customers want and making sure there's that robust portfolio is what's going to continue to drive the economic impact discussion that was just up here before we came. And making sure that those organizations that are looking to relocate in specific places like Texas have that array of options that they're looking for.
Great. Bryan, as a gas-fired generator, the word transition means from something to something. You all are the workhorse of this industry right now. How do you all feel your position is going to be if we ever get to the end of the transition?
Well, I don't ever want to see the end of the transition. I think it's just going to be forever, man. It's going to go on, and we're going to have a great time here in Texas, just having our economy develop. So the idea that there's an end, no way. But for us, and I don't see any of my old engineering professors in the audience, so I can talk about this in a simplified term. For us, it's about, again, trying to meet the demands of our customers, and we've got a bunch of customers that want the kind of profile of clean energy that comes from wind and solar, but they want the reliability that comes with a gas plant. And so the way we're trying to achieve that is by hooking up to the tailpipe of our plant, facilities that can capture the carbon. It goes into a chemical solution, carbon gets sorted out, pressurized and stuck into the ground for forever, at least on any of our lifetimes. And that's one of the ways that we think we can help with the transition and achieving goals. And if any of my professors were to hear me explain it like that, I think I probably would get a D-, but that's essentially what it is.
Thank you. Hesston, we know that your company at AES Clean Energy announced a $4 billion hydrogen facility in North Texas. Hydrogen is one of those fuels that most people don't know a lot about. They don't know where it is. But if you're talking at a transition conference in energy, it is definitely going to be one of the cornerstones of the discussion. Will you tell us a little bit about your project and why Texas makes sense for that?
Yeah, so the project we're building in North Texas in Will-Barger County and a little bit into Baylor County, joint venture between AES and Air Products, and largest green hydrogen project announced so far in the U.S. We're hopefully about 18 months from actual shovels in the ground and building the thing. Capable of producing about 200 tons of green hydrogen per day. You all can Google later the color wheel of hydrogen, but the green hydrogen is an electrolyzer process, taking water and splitting the hydrogen off of the water and capturing it for use as a transportation fuel. That's the plan for that project, is to sell our hydrogen to the transportation market. So really excited to start seeing auto manufacturers really starting to invest in fuel cell technology for over-the-road trucking and shipping and aviation fuels. And so we feel like there's a really strong coming demand for hydrogen, and happy to be at the forefront of it.
Great. Suresh, as the banker to a lot of the companies out there that are looking to hydrogen, in a regard, it doesn't matter what color, but a lot of blue, a lot of green hydrogen. How do you see this transition happening, and will it be as real as people think or are they talking about?
Yeah, it's, there was a lot of hype on the transition, over the last, call it, 36 months. I think we're finally at, a very balanced discussion around the transition. I think people are looking at what economically works first as we think about, the various technologies that are coming on. Hydrogen for me is really an interesting fuel. If you go through the energy sector or the industry, you're either labeled as like an electron guy or a molecule guy. And I find that hydrogen is finally like this crossroad, which is incredible, right? Because on one hand, you can put it into PEM cells and make power. On the other hand, I can introduce other things to make ammonia, green ammonia, or methanol, which is very akin to our oil and gas side of the world, right? So I find hydrogen to be an extremely interesting, versatile energy unit. And at the Loan Program Office, we're seeing so many great applications like this where there's niche applications where it's very economic. And I think, to me, the transition is all about not just putting a plant for the sake of putting a plant there, but can we make it economic for the buyer? And there's absolutely a cost curve that we have seen has decreased over and over again. It happened in wind and solar. The more you create a supply chain, costs do come down, and that's important to us.
Bryan, your gas-fired generation, I assume some of it has the ability to be co-fired by hydrogen or blended with hydrogen. How do you all see that fitting into your mix in the future? Is that what you expect these plants to be burning in 2035, or do you not know yet? Is it about economics?
Well, it's about economics. The chatter that I've heard internally about this is that right now it doesn't make sense to try and burn hydrogen either through the plant or even as a blend. That doesn't mean it won't make sense in the future, especially if there's some kind of federal incentives through tax credits, or if there's customer demand for the environmental attributes that come with something like that. But that's not something that we're really looking hard at this time. I think we see a higher value for the hydrogen being used for like ammonia processing and that type of thing at this time.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just a quick rebuttal on forklifts that are battery powered. You can put PEM cells in there with hydrogen, and they actually are economic because you got to have a bunch of battery charging stations in a warehouse. And in a warehouse, what's more valuable to you? It's the space, right? So things like this are where we're all gravitating to on a case-by-case basis where there's economic applications, and that's quite exciting.
So we talk about hydrogen at the industrial scale as an industrial fuel. Will we ever get to hydrogen cars?
I can't comment on that. I just don't know. I think there's a lot of other things we could be doing in the interim. I don't know if others have a view.
As someone that sells electricity, I hope we go with electric cars.
Listen, go on, Hesston.
I think we will start to see more and more hydrogen-fueled vehicles. As I mentioned, the over-the-road, trucking, that's where it makes a lot of sense because batteries don't make a lot of sense for long-haul trucking. Simply the weight of the batteries, it makes it almost unfeasible over long distances. But organizations, logistics companies that have distribution centers and hubs, they can put that spoke and wheel kind of model in place for hydrogen fuel cells and fueling stations. That'll probably be the first kind of domino to fall, and then but all the major auto manufacturers are looking at fuel cells and starting to look at how that's going to fit into the future portfolio of their company. So.
And that always takes me back to the former governor of California, the Terminator, when he got his hydrogen-powered Hummer. We need one of those in Texas to show everybody the way. So let's talk solar and batteries in the power market here. How do you all see those providing reliable services, or do they need the other backup services, batteries, gas, coal, nuclear, to ensure that the businesses are powered out there with 24/7 power? Hesston, why don't you go?
Yeah, I mean, I think today, 100%, you have to have all of the above. There is no switch we can all flip to completely go to solar, wind, and batteries. I think we are getting much better. The technologies are starting to catch up, and I think eventually we may get to a point where we can be more reliant on the clean technologies. I do think batteries, specifically in Texas, have a huge place and a huge, part to play in securing the grid here. I mean, we know the grid here has congestion issues, and we know there's constraints on the grid here, and being able to put standalone battery projects in population centers so that if there's Winter Storm Uri or summertime potential brownouts, those can save the grid. And we were chatting before we came up here, but in Texas, nobody really likes to mention the fact that California does anything right. But the one thing they have done really good is their battery policies. And we as a company have 4 gigawatts of standalone battery storage in the California grid and the CAISO market, and it literally those batteries saved the grid this year. You heard a lot about LA was going to have brownouts, and the reason they didn't was because of the battery storage. So I think there's a future. It's just going to take time to get there.
Bryan, what about you? They're competitors to yours at times, and they're complement at other times. How do y'all view that?
I'm on team all of the above. I mean, in California, we've invested in batteries because that market has made sense for us to invest there. Batteries, they're limited in duration. I think there's something that can supplement the peaks and valleys that come with the wind and solar, but I don't know that they're by themselves are the only thing. They don't actually create energy. They just transform when it's consumed. But I think that it can help, especially as we're growing here in Texas, and that's the thing that's, in terms of dispatchable capacity, the thing that's been growing the fastest. And I think there are incentives, federal incentives in particular, that are helpful for that.
Suresh, you got a lot of money going into these different technologies. Wind and solar have tax credits also. Is the best space for the loan program on the manufacturing side of things to help bring those costs down? So solar panels and battery components here in the U.S., or how do you all view that?
Yeah, I mean, we've got 3 to 4 programs, depending on how you think of it. One of them is absolutely manufacturing, right? We want to create a manufacturing base in the United States, and if you look at some of the deals we've done, a lot of joint ventures in battery manufacturing, whether it's battery manufacturing for the big 3, 4 car manufacturers, or whether it's battery manufacturing for really as a commercial application to the grid. For example, long duration battery storage, right? We think that there's going to be a good demand for that because, as you said, a lot of this stuff is shorter duration. I think what we're really excited about in the loan program office also is batteries provide for this flexibility, and we call that flexibility a virtual power plant. And if you actually go to one of our websites, we've got a liftoff report called Virtual Power Plants. And what it is it's the ability to aggregate generation, batteries, and software. And with the increasing volatility that's introduced by wind say in ERCOT, when you do have a peak or a spike in load, these things can be aggregated and dispatched, and we think that's super interesting for a way to kind of save consumers money. So I think there's going to be a lot of dynamic ability to load shift, and we just find that very fascinating.
Let me follow up on that. As a banker who's worked in the private sector for, my guess is all your career except for this job.
Yep.
How is it pushing federal money at low interest rates versus to the private sector? Is that an easy task or for these energy projects, or is that harder than you thought?
I can do a deal in the private side in 2 to 3 months, and within a government construct, that takes a lot longer. We have a lot of risk management and policies that we have to check through. Eligibility is a very important criteria, and that takes a couple of months to figure out. Then we got to get through diligence. As a government entity, we have to issue RFPs to go get an advisor, right? You can imagine, like, in the private sector, I just call up the lawyer I'm used to working with or my, banker, and just you're ready to go. I got to get through a process. So there's a time lag. There's a lot of check and balance as we go through. So it's been harder than I had envisioned, but it's a function of resources. We're building up our resources. We stand at 180 applications in total today. People are requested $160 billion. And we've grown from an 80-person organization to a little over 300-person organization. So running deal teams, we're getting better and more dynamic to make sure that we are deploying capital. That is our job, right? Press releases are great, but our goal is to actually get things built. So it's been harder, but I'm a half glass full person, and with the right commercial mindset, we can get it done.
Bryan, how do you all see loan program activities? Are they hard to participate in, or are they? Is it easier with high cost of capital out there right now? Is that something that Calpine looks to, or how does your company think about that?
That's a really great question. You know, with this Texas Energy Fund, the ledge passed, and you now have these rules open. I think comments are due on January 5th. We're looking hard at what Commission has put out, and I think we're going to be interested in participating in that program.
Yeah, I think we're seeing other states as well as Texas, as well as the federal government, they continue to put more and more money in this. Some of it's to offset tax credits associated with wind and solar to make the other technologies economic. So it's interesting. Someday, some academic's going to come back and do a real study on how much our taxpayers have spent on all of these subsidies, and it's going to be pretty astronomical.
I will say this: the rising interest rate environment has placed a lot of stress in the lending market on the private side. No doubt about it. The Loan Program Office isn't a healthy alternative because we can't charge more than Treasury plus 200. That is where the policy is. So on one hand, it's cheaper. On the other hand, you have to deal with process. And if you're trying to deploy large capital, it's an investment to go through the process and try to move the needle, I would say, as people think about, making investment in a lot of these sectors, and, folks like AES and Calpine, and they all see that attraction.
Hesston, your company builds facilities all over the world. How do you view the Texas, not just the power market, but the Texas environment for doing business here? Have you found it attractive that you can build quickly?
Build quickly, yes. I think, historically Texas has been, we've heard it numerous times today, Texas is a very attractive place to build, regardless of whether it's a manufacturing plant or a power plant. I think, we obviously the decision to build our hydrogen project in North Texas was in large part due to the business-friendly climate here in Texas. I will say, as a clean energy IPP, we are definitely a little bit concerned with some of the potential changes that might be coming down the pike from the legislature that might be a little less friendly to making those investments here. But I think for now we're still comfortable making those investments. It's the important thing I hope to impress on decision makers and policy makers is making sure that Texas is open to business of all kinds, right? And because there's knock-on effects, and if you take one investment out of the mix, it'll almost always have an impact on another one down the line. And so yeah, keeping it friendly to everybody is paramount to making sure that Texas remains the best place to locate a business.
Suresh, what does you get to live in Texas and work for the federal government, which is maybe the best of both worlds, but what's the view inside the loan office of the business environment in Texas? Do they believe that we can build big projects? I know we funded big hydrogen hub, we funded other things that are billions and billions of dollars for the future. Is part of that because we are a can-do society? We build things here in Texas.
Yeah, look, I should say that when you look at our applications, there is a pretty good diversification across the United States, which we think is very healthy. That being said, Texas certainly has a big share, and we are private sector led, right, with government assistance. So the fact that Texas has good policies, entrepreneurial policies, really helps developers come up with projects here faster. And as a result of that, we see a bigger percentage of applications that are from this area. So we love the idea that, entrepreneurs are finding unique ways to make money in Texas, and we're here to support them.
Hesston, do you see hydrogen as the future of AES, or do you see that it's still a fairly good split between hydrogen and wind, solar, storage? How do you see that going forward?
I think hydrogen will be a big part of AES. It'll definitely stay a split. We're lucky enough to be a part of one of the hydrogen hubs in Houston, as well as one in California. Those projects, as was mentioned earlier about bringing the cost curve down, that's really what the hydrogen hub funding is all about, is trying to bring clean hydrogen costs down. And I think it's critical we do that, because if you look at from a domestic security, domestic energy independence, you look at what countries like Saudi Arabia and Australia have already announced that they're going to be putting into green hydrogen technologies, far eclipses what we're doing in the U.S. And hydrogen is one of those. It's a fuel. It's not electricity generation, right? You can actually import it. So if it truly does become one of those transportation fuels, we need to stay in lockstep from a cost standpoint, from a production standpoint with our global competitors. Otherwise, we're going to be behind the 8 ball in the future.
Does it really make sense to produce green hydrogen out in the Panhandle with wind and ship it by pipeline down to the Gulf Coast? Is that an economic, or is that more on the wish list of things that if there's a global market for hydrogen or ammonia, it becomes a tax credit driven product? Or is it real? Is this a real demand, or is this a government driven demand?
Well, I think it's going to be region by region and case by case, right? It might not make sense in the Panhandle for numerous reasons. There's not a lot of free water sitting out there to be able to produce green hydrogen in the Panhandle. So you have to take those sorts of considerations. But if you look at the high velocity hub in Houston, it's on the Gulf Coast. There's already over 1,000 miles of hydrogen pipelines in the ground. It's already the largest hydrogen producing region in the country. So absolutely makes sense to do it in those kinds of places. The hydrogen plant in North Texas, because it's not planned to be used for industrial primarily, it's going to be used for transportation. We can truck it, right? It's going to go into hydrogen-fueled tanker trucks and driven to the places that for distribution and consumption. So I think it's really going to matter the location for sure.
Bryan?
I think right now it's kind of both. To your question, I think people are investing because the tax credits are so rich, but I also think that there are industrial uses, and that's kind of a regional thing. I mean, hydrogen is a great feedstock for many chemical processes, and so if you have the refineries and chemical manufacturers that need that, then that's perfect. But I think right now a lot of the investments kind of government-created market, and there are benefits to that too.
The 1,000 miles, I've heard it's somewhere around 1,500 miles of hydrogen pipelines versus, I think the number is somewhere in the 300,000 range for natural gas pipelines. It seems like we've got a long way to go. If we're going to build that many pipelines or repurpose some pipelines, we're going to have a lot of NIMBY issues with this fuel, perhaps, because a lot of people don't know about it. They don't understand it, and it's easy to sway opinion. So it might take a lot of educational effort before we can really make it utilized across the U.S. So I'm going to bring up an issue that's kind of near and dear to my heart right now. It is a totally non-economic technology. This would be called nuclear, small nuclear reactors, modular reactors. We are leading up an effort for Governor Abbott to try to set the landscape in Texas for small modular reactors. We just started kicking it off, but we think there's a lot of potential here. How does AES see the competition versus nuclear, or is it totally non-existent right now?
I don't think, we don't look at it as a competition side of things. I think SMRs are an extremely exciting, technology that hopefully can get there from that cost perspective again. I mean, I grew up in Utah, and so I have a lot of close friends that work for Pacific Corp, and they're working on the SMR project in Kimmer, Wyoming, and You're talking about a 500 megawatt SMR that's going to cost $4 billion to build. That's not an economic decision. That's not an economical decision, and the federal government is going to pay $2 billion of that, but that still leaves $2 billion that ratepayers are going to have to make up. So I think we're going to have to go through just like with every other technology. There's going to be growing pains, and we're going to have to figure this out. But I think SMRs definitely have a place. AES doesn't currently have any plans to be involved directly in SMRs, but I don't think the door is necessarily shut either.
Bryan, can we incent you all to build a few SMRs here in Texas?
I want to share a personal anecdote. One of the greatest things I got to do this year was to go on the USS Roosevelt, which is a aircraft carrier. My brother is an officer on that ship, and he has a bunk bed. He sleeps in a rack between essentially two nuclear reactors. And I thought about this ship and how it operates. And really prior to that, I think I was just a doubter on the overall cost. But when you see basically a 4-acre platform that allows for jets to take off that can float across the ocean and never have to refuel but once every 8 years, it's a pretty cool thing. And so if you compare that with industrial processes, I see the potential for that after having witnessed that. The cost is a real thing, and who pays for that is also a real thing.
Well, some of it's going to come from the guy next to you. So how does the Loan Program Office want to give away their money in the nuclear space?
Yeah, I mean, we spent a significant amount of time as part of, we need all these resources, but nuclear is something we very focused on. Definitely looking at SMRs. And look, Jigar Shah, who's our director of the Loan Program Office, will tell you, the perception is that nuclear is complicated. It costs a lot of money. I think what we are finding is there is not enough serial numbers out there that we have embraced to develop in that particular sector. We just commissioned Vogtle, which was a $12 billion facility. I think it was numerous billions cost overrun, okay? But if you think about why it happened, it's because new supply chains had to be created to bring in, equipment. And what are we doing? We're not building the next reactor, which we should be, because you're leveraging those supply chains that are actually being built. So it's not complicated. It's less complicated than building a refinery, okay? And we do that, and we haven't built one since the 70s, but there's a lot of things that are more complicated. The point being is you've got to build supply chains, and you've got to leverage these supply chains, and costs will come down. At the Loan Program Office, we are providing capital to get these things started. We are a bridge to bankability, and our job is to do this so that we can have these things get to a cost curve where it helps the American consumer, and that's part of our mission.
As the head of this effort, I'm excited about it, primarily because we can take a lot of the expertise from the oil and gas industry. The oil and gas industry is very modularized. If you think of fracking equipment, if you think of offshore oil and gas platforms, it is very modularized. They can build these things over and over and over very quickly, and that puts Texas in a really good spot to be able to be part of that supply chain going forward. So we're excited about that, and we're looking for success in this space. That was the last word, y'all. Would you all give a round for our panel and thank them for their good thoughts?
Thank you.